Hi, my name is Alicia Lugo. This is my evidence tree. I'm going to talk about the New World Order, what had happened in the past 3 decades, like the Cold War, the life in the socialist blocs, the military conflicts, the fall of the Soviet Union, and the consolidation of geopolitical unipolar system, also the beginning of globalization. Now I'm going to talk about the events of the last 3 decades, from the crisis of the socialist bloc until today, the digital era. The 80s events. Chernobyl nuclear disaster, April 26, 1986. At 1 a.m. on April 26, 1986, reactor 4 at the nuclear power plant near Chernobyl, Ukraine exploded, releasing more than 100 times the radiation of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 31 people died shortly after the explosion, and thousands of more are expected to die from long-term effects of radiation. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster dramatically changed the world's opinion about using nuclear reaction for power. Fall of the Berlin Wall, November 9, 1989. On November 1989 marks the fall of the Berlin Wall. On that day, East Germany's communist rulers gave permission for gates along the wall to be opened as a result of their mass protests. After decades of partition, East Berliners saw through cheering and shouting and were greeted by West Berliners on the other side. Ecstatic crowds immediately began to climb on the top of the wall and destroy segments of the concrete fort. World Wide Web, 1989. In 1989, the World Wide Web was invented by Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He was trying to find a new way for scientists to easily share the data from their experiments. Hypertext in the internet already existed at this point, but no one had thought of a way to use the internet to link one document directly to another. The 90s events. First Gulf War, August 2nd, 1990. The First Gulf War, which included Operation Desert Storm, was a military response to Iraq's invasion and subsequent annexation of Kuwait, a small neighboring country with the world's fifth largest oil reserves. Led by the United States, coalition forces began a massive aerial campaign on January 17, 1991, followed by a ground offensive, and liberated Kuwait from the army of Saddam Hussein. Hubble Space Telescope, April 24, 1990. The Hubble Space Telescope's launch in 1990 sped humanity to one of its greatest advances in that journey. Hubble is a telescope that orbits Earth. Its position above the atmosphere, which distorts and blocks the light that reaches our planet, gives it a view of the universe that typically far surpasses that of ground-based telescopes. The Hong Kong hangover, 1st July 1987. July 1st commemorates the day that China recapitulated sovereignty over Hong Kong after more than a century of British colonial commands in 1997. In 1842, the Chinese emperor conceded Hong Kong Island for the British. This gave an end to the First Opium War. The Sino-British Joint Declaration of Government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the Government of People's Republics of China on the question of Hong Kong has signed at the end of 1988, giving away the return of Hong Kong under Chinese control on July 1, 1987, under one country, two systems policy. The 20th events. September 11 attacks, September 11, 2001. Al-Qaeda terrorists aboard 3 hijacked passenger planes carried out coordinated suicide attacks against the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. A 4th plane crashed into Pennsylvania field and killing all on board. Iraq War, March 20, 2003 to December 18, 2011. The Iraq War was protracted armed conflict that began with the 2003 invasion of Iraq, led by the United States. The invasion toppled the government of Saddam Hussein. The conflict, however, continued for much of the next decade as insurgency emerged to oppose the occupying forces and the post-invasion Iraqi government. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, March 11, 2011. The Great East Earthquake occurred at 2:46 p.m. on March 11th, recorded magnitude 9, has given tremendous damage to the northern part of Japan, especially on the prefectures of Fukushima, Miyagi, and Iwate. Now I will give a description of the following concepts. First, globalization. Globalization is the process of interaction and integration among the people, companies, and governments of different nations, a process driven by international trade and investment and aided by information technology. This process has effects on the environment, on culture, on political system, on economic development and prosperity, and on human physical well-being in societies around the world. Terrorism. Terrorism is the use of intentionally indiscriminate violence in order to achieve a political, religious, or ideological aim. It is classified as a fourth-generation warfare and as a violent crime. In modern times, terrorism is considered a major threat to society and therefore illegal under anti-terrorism laws in most jurisdictions. Unipolar world. Unipolarity is used to describe the power structure when one superpower dominates alone. The end of the Cold War meant that the previous decade's superpower rivalry now had ended. There was no longer the traditional East versus West conflict, at least not the way it had been earlier in the 20th century. Finally, the digital era. The information age, also known as the computer age, digital age, or new media age, is a period in human history characterized by the shift from traditional industry that the Industrial Revolution brought through the industrialization to an economy based on information computerization. The onset of information age is associated with the digital revolution, just as the industrial revolution marked on the set of industrial age. The reflection. First question: why did the globalization emerge? Talking historically, the historiographers relate globalization as a Big Bang, which came with connotation in 1492 when Christopher Columbus stumbles on America for spices, and 1488 when Vasco da Gama visited Africa and snatched monopoly rents away from Arabians and Venetians spice sellers. Generally, I can say that globalization emerged due to the human necessity of communication and competition. It is not a recent process. As I said before, of Christopher Columbus, it is just an exchange behavior we can change. It brings ideas, cultures, and even religions together. Second question: in most cases, what caused the terrorist attacks of 20th century? We can define terrorism as the threatened of use of violence in order to achieve a political, religious, or ideological aim. It started in the late 1970s and earliest 1980s, when the Cold War was at its peak and the Soviet Union took control of Afghanistan. These terrorist attacks happened for two major reasons. The first one is social and political injustice. People use terrorism when they have been stripped of their land or rights and try to express what they perceive to be social and politically wrong. The belief that violence will be effective. Many terrorists in history said sincerely that they choose violence after long deliberation because they felt they had no choice. One example of terrorism is when Osama bin Laden's declaration of war on American interests in the 1990s stemmed from his belief that US troops stationed in Saudi Arabia represented an abomination to kind of Islamic State he believed should exist in the Arabian Peninsula. How does the end of the Cold War relate with the unipolar world? The Cold War was a confrontation to the bipolar world. The ideologies that made the world bipolar were communism supported by Russia and democracy supported by the US. By the end of the Cold War, the US had already greatly spread its ideology. And because Russia became weak due to bad economic conditions, the US won the Cold War, making the bipolar world more like a unipolar world. Last question. How has the digital era influenced today's society? The digital era is another phenomenon that has marked our era. We have been advancing rapidly since the invention of the television and the telephone. The principal innovation that has marked the 20th century is the progression of the computer, as they are a fundamental part of our lives, helping us to process documents, perform numeric operations, control systems of all types, study, work, and be entertained. We can add that the invention of the internet has become a fundamental platform for converting information of any type. As a final thought, I can say that these events have made a legacy. It remains evident in today's politics, economic, societies, and cultures on a global level. We don't know what is going to happen next, but we are sure we have the experience to be mature and don't have the same mistakes as we had the last 3 decades.